What if the great artists of the 19th century, whose masterpieces we admire in museums, weren't just visionaries, but impartial chroniclers of a global catastrophe? What if their landscapes are not flights of fancy, but a frozen record of an event that official history prefers to ignore? This idea might seem absurd, but only until we start looking closely at the details in their work. Across Europe, from Italy to Russia, artists from different schools and movements depicted the same haunting scene: majestic cities, castles, and ancient structures buried under thick layers of clay and earth. These aren't just picturesque ruins. In the engravings of Giovanni Battista Piranesi from the mid-18th century, we see a Rome that tourists today wouldn't recognize. The famous Pyramid of Cestius is buried deep underground, with people in the painting walking at a level that would be several stories high today. The landscape is frozen in waves of mud and clay, as if a giant wave of solid matter washed over the city and hardened. Decades later, at the end of the same century, the Russian painter Fyodor Matveyev created his Italian city. And again, we see the same picture: a settlement on a hill, flooded with streams of clay. This mass clearly came from above, flowing down the slopes, filling the streets, and burying the lower floors of buildings. In the lowlands, you can see puddles of liquid, as if the disaster had just happened. Mainstream science offers a simple and, at first glance, logical explanation: the cultural layer. Historians tell us that over centuries, dust, debris, and the remains of old buildings accumulate, causing the ground level to gradually rise. It's a natural process. But can a natural process create a layer 5, 10, or even 15 meters thick? Can a cultural layer fall from the sky like a heavy downpour, selectively burying monumental structures while leaving fragile trees untouched? The artist's paintings tell a story not of slow decay, but of a sudden, devastating event that changed the landscape of entire continents in an instant. These canvases are more than just landscapes. If you look closely, they become crime scenes, frozen in time. The artists, perhaps without realizing it, left us crucial evidence that the official version can't explain. Hidden within them are details that make the neat historical theory crumble like a house of cards. To understand what really happened, we need to look at these paintings through the eyes of an investigator and try to decipher the messages left by the witnesses of that era. Because it is in these details, in the postures of the people, the strange nature of the destruction, and the very substance that swallowed the cities, that the key to unlocking the great mystery of the 19th century lies. When we set aside our usual perceptions and start examining these canvases as evidence, a completely different reality emerges. The first thing that catches the eye is the recurring image of people. In many paintings we see small figures wandering through the flooded landscapes. They are often depicted with long sticks or poles. Historians might call them tourists or curious onlookers, but their posture and actions suggest otherwise. They are not strolling. They are moving forward cautiously, probing the ground in front of them with their sticks. This is the behavior of survivors who know that beneath their feet isn't solid ground, but a viscous, not yet dry mass that could swallow a careless traveler at any moment. They are witnesses, trying to assess the scale of the disaster, officials and ordinary people in a world that changed overnight. The second and perhaps most important aspect is the nature of the flood itself. This was not a flood in the classic sense where water rises from the bottom up. The clay-like mass in the paintings didn't rise from rivers or seas. It fell from above. Castles and cathedrals on hills are buried from the top down, their roofs and upper floors covered by streams of mud that then flow downwards, forming giant deposits at their base. In the painting Castle on the Seashore by Sokrat Vorobyov, a substance can be seen falling from the sky, covering everything around it. This explains why massive stone structures were buried up to their domes, whereas ordinary water would have simply filled them from the inside and receded. This was something different, a planetary-scale mudflow that came from the sky. And the third strange thing is the composition of this substance. The clay that consumed the cities turned out to be surprisingly fertile. In the paintings, we see that only a short time has passed since the cataclysm. Yet mature trees and dense shrubs are already growing on top of the buried ruins, on roofs and walls. This contradicts logic. Usually after a mudslide or landslide, the ground is left dead and lifeless. But here, the deadly substance that buried a civilization also gave rise to a burst of new life. The geography of this evidence is astounding. This scenario is repeated with frightening consistency in paintings created in different parts of the world. We see buried ruins in sunny Italy, destroyed fortresses in Belarus and Ukraine in the lithographs of Napoleon Orda, and buried mausoleums in Samarkand in the paintings of Vasily Vereshchagin. Everywhere the disaster has the same signature: an impact from above, massive volumes of clay, and the subsequent reclaiming of the ruins by survivors. This could not have been a local earthquake or volcanic eruption. It was a global event, the traces of which 19th century artists documented for us with photographic precision. But a skeptic might argue these are just paintings, the romantic creations of artists fascinated by ruins. Perhaps. But what if I told you there is a real place where the traces of this catastrophe can not only be seen, but touched with your own hands, even today? Where the evidence is buried not on canvas, but in the earth itself. For this, we must travel from the quiet halls of art galleries to the scorching sands of Uzbekistan, to an ancient city that holds a terrible secret beneath its layers of clay. Paintings, no matter how convincing, always leave room for doubt. They are art, not photographs. But the line between artistic interpretation and historical fact becomes frighteningly thin when we move from European canvases to the sun-scorched plains of Central Asia, to the walls of the ancient city of Khiva. Here, at a crossroads of the Great Silk Road, the silent clues are not on canvas, but baked into the very earth. And they tell the same terrible story. The first thing that strikes you about Khiva is its monumental fortress walls. These are not just defensive structures, they are cyclopean bastions, up to 5 meters thick. They are not built of rough stone, but of countless baked clay bricks, a testament to incredible engineering skill and immense labor. Looking at them, one question arises. What force could have destroyed them? The southern part of the wall looks as if giant chunks were ripped out of it. Official history tells us about siege engines, long battles, and assaults, but let's be honest. What battering rams or primitive cannons of that time could break through a 5-meter-thick wall of baked brick? Even a modern tank would struggle with such a task. The destruction isn't localized, like from cannonballs, but massive and chaotic, as if the city was struck by an element of colossal, inhuman power. But the most chilling proof is hidden not in the scale of the destruction, but in the very substance that engulfed the city. In the thick layers of compressed clay that form the hills at the foot of the ancient walls, you can find something that forever dismisses the theory of a slow cultural layer. Human bones are sticking right out of the earth. These are not ancient burials or cemeteries. They are fragments of wrists and shin bones embedded in the geological stratum, having become an integral part of it. They are arranged chaotically, without any order, which points to one thing. People were caught completely by surprise. The conclusion that follows is as obvious as it is horrifying. This gigantic mass of clay and mud did not just bury an already abandoned city. It collapsed on it suddenly, covering it along with all its inhabitants, burying them alive in an instant. This was not the aftermath of a battle. This was the battle itself. A battle of man against an element he could not win. The people whose remains are now slowly being exposed by rain and wind were not victims of war. but victims of a cataclysm that instantly turned their thriving city into a mass grave. These bones in the clay walls of Khiva are irrefutable evidence. They prove that the event documented by artists thousands of kilometers away was not just a flood or a landslide, but a deadly force that destroyed everything in its path. The scale of the destruction and the instantaneous death of an entire city suggest this was hardly an ordinary natural disaster. Now, armed with this terrible knowledge, we can return to the works of European artists and see that the geography of this catastrophe was truly vast. Their paintings are no longer just landscapes. They become snapshots from different parts of a single global crime scene. The evidence discovered in Khiva transforms the theory of a global catastrophe from a bold hypothesis into a chilling reality. Now that we have physical proof, human bones embedded in a geological layer, we can say with certainty, it happened. And the map of this apocalypse is far wider than one could have imagined. To grasp the true scale of the tragedy, we must turn to the works of another artist documentarian. In the 19th century, an amazing artist and composer named Napoleon Orda traveled through the lands we now know as Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine. His lithographs are not just landscapes, but a meticulous, almost forensic report on the state of the world after the disaster. In his works, we see all the same familiar themes. The Mir and Kreva castles in Belarus, the Ostro Castle in Ukraine. Dozens of monumental structures appear as majestic ruins, drowning in giant heaps of sand and clay. Of their former greatness, only battered walls remain, and the roofs, if they survived, look as if they endured a powerful blow from above, a kind of hailstorm, as contemporaries described it. The sky in many of his drawings has a characteristic reddish tint, as if the dust and clay that fell to earth still hangs suspended in the atmosphere. Life, of course, goes on. Trees grow, water flows, but the overall feeling is of a world that has survived something terrible. However, there is one detail in Orda's work that takes our investigation to a new level. His lithographs present a shocking contrast. Next to the Cyclopean ruins of castles, whose walls seem the work of giants rather than men, huddle tiny, almost primitive houses. These are two different worlds, existing in the same time and space. On one side, the heritage of a great, highly developed civilization, capable of erecting structures of incredible strength and scale. On the other, the life of survivors, who build their modest homes right at the foot of these ruins, sometimes even attaching sheds to the ancient walls. It's as if one great civilization was wiped off the face of the earth, and the few who survived, having lost the technology and knowledge of their ancestors, began to build their new, simpler life on the bones of former greatness. And here, another, more terrifying hypothesis arises. Looking at these pictures, one gets the persistent feeling that this was not a blind rampage of nature, but a targeted destruction. The mudflows seem to have a mind of their own, selectively covering the centers of power, knowledge, and authority. Castles, fortresses, monumental buildings. Simple villages might have survived, but the Cyclopean structures of the previous era had to be buried, hidden from the eyes of future generations. It seems as if someone or something was methodically flooding these sites, trying to turn them into formless hills. What we see today is only what they failed to hide, what was washed away by subsequent rains and winds. So, what do we have? We see a picture of a global event that swept across Eurasia, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia and Eastern Europe. This event destroyed a highly developed civilization, leaving behind only ruins and a few survivors who started history almost from scratch. And the nature of the destruction suggests it was no accident. But what force is capable of such a thing? What technology can cause flows of clay from the sky and purposefully wipe entire cities and cultures off the face of the earth? The answer may be more terrifying than we think. And it is, paradoxically, encrypted once again in art, in the most disturbing and incomprehensible images left to us by artists. We have pieced together the geography of the catastrophe, seen its physical traces, and realized that it led to the fall of an entire civilization. But the main question remains unanswered. What caused it? If we dismiss the theories of natural disasters, which don't hold up to scrutiny, we must look for the answer in the most daring and disturbing images left to us by the artists. Some of them seem to have depicted not only the aftermath, but the moment of impact itself. Let's recall the painting by Sokrat Vorobyov, where a substance falls from the sky onto a castle. It's not rain or snow. It's something dense, tangible. But we find even more explicit and frightening images in the work of the artist Konstantin Bogaevsky. His paintings are not just landscapes, they are frozen apocalypses, and one of his works has a symbolic title, The Star Wormwood. In it, we see a city being simultaneously flooded by streams of mud, and illuminated by a brilliant flash emanating from a single point. The artist depicted not just the destruction, he showed its cause. This is not lightning, not a natural phenomenon. It is an explosion. The expressive brushstrokes convey the feeling of matter flying in all directions, a shockwave that demolishes everything in its path. The title, The Star Wormwood, is a direct reference to the biblical prophecy of the apocalypse, about a star that fell from the sky and poisoned the waters. Was the artist trying to tell us that the catastrophe had a cosmic, or even more terrifying, a man-made origin, with consequences comparable to the biblical end of the world? This thought finds an unexpected echo in the lines of the poet Maximilian Voloshin, who wrote of Russia, "The underwater Kitezh hums at the bottom of the soul." The legendary city of Kitezh is a city that, according to legend, sank into the waters of Lake Svetloyar to escape from its enemies. Since then, as the legend goes, only those pure of heart and soul can hear the ringing of its bells and see its reflection in the water. This beautiful legend takes on a completely different, sinister meaning if we look at Lake Svetloyar itself. It has an almost perfect, geometrically regular round shape and great depth, which is completely uncharacteristic for lakes in this area. Its outline is frighteningly similar to a crater from a massive explosion. And here, the most radical and terrifying version is born. What if the legend of the city of Kitezh is a distorted folk memory of a real event? What if a great city really stood on this site, but it didn't sink into the water? It was destroyed by a colossal explosion that left behind a perfectly round crater, which eventually filled with water. The ringing of bells supposedly heard from under the water could be an echo, a phantom memory of the monstrous roar that shook the earth. Perhaps we are talking about a war of a previous civilization, a war using weapons of such destructive power that they left scars on the face of the planet in the form of perfectly round lakes. Explosions, streams of clay from the sky, buried cities and entire civilizations. All these seemingly disconnected fragments, the paintings of artists, the human bones in Khiva, the ruins across Europe, and the legend of the city of Kitezh come together into a single, shocking picture. A picture of a world that survived a war or a series of strikes, with weapons unknown to us. And this picture completely contradicts everything we were taught in school about the calm and measured 19th century. Now that the outlines of a civilization wiped from the face of the earth have emerged before us, the last and most important question remains. Our investigation has led us from vague suspicions to horrifying conclusions. Step by step, the scattered fragments of a forgotten past have formed a single, disturbing mosaic that challenges everything we know about history. Let's retrace this chain of evidence to appreciate its undeniable power. It all began in the quiet halls of art galleries, with the visual testimony of dozens of 19th century artists. As if by agreement, they all painted the same thing. cities buried under layers of clay that had fallen from above. We saw people with poles probing the viscous sludge, and realized they were not tourists, but survivors. We saw trees sprouting instantly from the ruins and understood that the substance that brought death was unnaturally fertile. These paintings became our first and most important piece of evidence, the silent testimonies of an era. But art can be dismissed as fantasy. That is, until that fantasy finds its chilling confirmation in reality. The expedition to Khiva provided us with irrefutable physical evidence. 5-meter-thick walls destroyed with inexplicable force, and, most importantly, human remains embedded directly into the geological strata. These bones cry out to us through the centuries that the catastrophe was real, sudden, and deadly for all living things. This is not a cultural layer. It is a giant mass grave. This terrible discovery allowed us to grasp the true scale of the events. The works of Napoleon Orda and other artists expanded the map of destruction from Central Asia to the very heart of Europe. We saw that everywhere. Next to the megalithic ruins of a great civilization huddled the primitive houses of a new world. This was not a local event, but a global cataclysm that drew a thick line between two eras, erasing one of them from the face of the earth. And finally, we identified a possible cause. The disturbing images in Bogaevsky's paintings, his star Wormwood, depicting a bright flash resembling an explosion. The legend of the city of Kitej and Lake Svetloyar, frighteningly similar to a crater from the use of a super-powerful weapon. All of this indicates that we are dealing not with a blind force of nature, but with the consequences of a war or targeted strikes, whose power seems fantastic to us today. Now, standing on the ruins of this forgotten world, we are left with the main, most important questions. Who were they, these masters of stone, whose cyclopean structures still stagger the imagination today? What level of technology and knowledge did they possess to erect such masterpieces all over the world? Why was their legacy so cruelly, suddenly, and it seems systematically erased from history? And what really happened in that quiet and gallant 19th century that made the world shudder and start its history anew? The official version of history offers us a neat, linear, and convenient narrative, but it is full of blank spots, uncomfortable questions, and facts that are easier to ignore than to explain. Perhaps the truth is far more amazing, complex, and terrifying than any fiction. It is not written in textbooks, but its echoes still resonate in ancient legends, and its scars show through the earth and look out at us from darkened canvases. The truth is not something we are told. It is something each of us must seek for ourselves, by learning to look, to analyze, and, most importantly, to ask questions.